The temperature was dropping rapidly, and I struggled to keep my eyes open. Exhaustion and cold were overwhelming me. That's when a wolf emerged from the mist, walking in circles around me. I tried to stay still to avoid provoking it, but every time my eyelids closed, it would growl and advance, forcing me to stay awake. I spent the entire night like that, shivering and terrified. Only when morning came did I realize I was on the verge of hypothermia, and if I had fallen asleep, I probably wouldn't have woken up. The wolf watched from a distance before leaving, as if it just wanted to make sure I would survive. I should never have left the main trail. That's the first rule any mountain guide repeats to Exhaustion, and I knew that rule well. Had heard it hundreds of times during my entire lifetime of hiking and camping. But that afternoon, with the sun still high and the sky perfectly blue, it seemed impossible that anything could go wrong. I had been in the northern mountains for 3 days, on an expedition I had planned for months, a solitary journey to reconnect with nature and escape the suffocating chaos of the city. The plan was simple, or so I thought. Follow the marked trails, camp at designated sites, document the journey with photographs and journal entries, and return to civilization after a week feeling refreshed and centered. I had sufficient provisions, adequate equipment, reasonable experience from dozens of previous hiking trips. I thought I was prepared for any eventuality. How catastrophically wrong I was. The decision to deviate from the marked trail happened almost without thinking, a moment of impulse that would change everything. I was following a well-maintained path along a ridgeline, enjoying the panoramic views of distant peaks, still capped with early snow, when I spotted something that made me pause. There, off to the east, was a narrow valley between 2 rocky walls that didn't appear on any of my topographical maps. The geological formation was striking, 2 massive granite cliffs that seemed to have been split apart by some ancient tectonic force, creating a passage that beckoned with mysterious shadows and the promise of untouched wilderness. There was something magnetic about that secret passage, a promise of discovery that spoke louder than prudence or the voice of caution in the back of my mind. I stood there for several minutes, checking my maps again, comparing them to the actual landscape, but the valley simply wasn't marked. It was as if modern cartography had somehow missed this entire geographical feature. The scientist in me was intrigued, the adventurer was excited, and the part of me that should have known better was unfortunately silent. I convinced myself it would just be a quick exploration, maybe an hour or 2 at most, that I would return to the main trail well before nightfall. I had plenty of daylight left, at least 4 hours by my estimation, and the detour seemed straightforward enough. I would descend into the valley, explore for a bit, take some photographs of what was clearly a geologically interesting area, and then climb back up to the ridge before the sun got too low. Simple, safe, reasonable. I marked my position with my GPS device, noted the exact coordinates where I was leaving the trail, and began my descent. The first part was easy. A gentle slope covered with alpine grass and small flowering plants that released sweet fragrances as my boots crushed them. Then the terrain changed dramatically, becoming steep and rocky, requiring careful foot placement and occasional use of my hands to maintain balance. I descended between the moss-covered rocks, the stone surfaces slick with moisture from underground springs that seeped constantly through the porous granite. My boots found firm support on the natural steps of stone, centuries of erosion having carved convenient ledges and footholds. I moved slowly, methodically, the way I had been taught during my first mountaineering course years ago. Safety first, speed second. Never rush on uncertain terrain. Test every handhold before committing your weight. These rules had kept me safe through countless climbs and hikes, and I followed them religiously, even as excitement built in my chest. As I descended deeper, I entered what felt like a different world entirely. The temperature dropped noticeably, the air becoming cooler and damper with every meter of descent. The walls of the valley rose on either side, blocking much of the direct sunlight and creating a perpetual twilight, even though it was only mid-afternoon. I entered a green corridor where what sunlight did penetrate filtered through the dense canopies of ancient trees, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. These were old-growth trees, massive pines and firs that had been growing here for centuries, their trunks so wide that 3 people couldn't have encircled them with linked arms. Their bark was deeply furrowed, covered with plates of lichen in shades of chartreuse, orange, and pale green. The air there was different, more humid than the dry mountain atmosphere above, loaded with the rich perfume of wet earth and pine resin, and the sweet decay of fallen logs slowly returning to soil. There was a peculiar silence in that place, as if the forest were holding its breath, waiting for something I couldn't identify. My footsteps on the soft carpet of pine needles made almost no sound. The usual background noise of wind through trees was absent, blocked by the surrounding rock walls. Even the birds seemed quieter here, their calls muted and distant. It was peaceful, but also slightly unnerving, this profound stillness that felt almost unnatural. I continued descending, now fully committed to exploring this hidden valley, fascinated by the wild and untouched beauty of the place. Everything here spoke of age and isolation, of a place where humans rarely, if ever, ventured. I found myself photographing everything, unable to stop capturing the extraordinary scenes around me. There were rock formations covered with thick cushions of moss and orange lichens that looked like abstract paintings. Small waterfalls emerged from cracks in the stone walls, their water so clear it was almost invisible until it caught the light, cascading over smooth boulders worn round by countless years of flow. Impossibly colored mushrooms grew from the sides of fallen trunks, bright red caps with white spots like something from a fairy tale, and clusters of delicate white fungi that glowed with an almost luminescent quality in the dim light. Ferns unfurled their fronds in the dampest areas, their green so vivid it almost hurt to look at. I found animal tracks in the soft earth near a small stream, the prints of deer and what might have been elk, and smaller tracks I couldn't identify but that sent a small thrill through me. This was wilderness in the truest sense, a place where animals lived without human interference, following the same patterns their ancestors had followed for millennia. Each step took me deeper, farther from the known trail, farther from safety, and I was completely absorbed in the experience, ignoring the fact that the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Time seemed to move differently here, flowing like the water over the stones, and I lost track of how long I'd been walking. It might have been an hour, might have been 3. My watch told me it was getting late, but I kept telling myself just one more photograph, just one more interesting formation, just a little bit farther to see what was around the next bend. When I finally decided to turn back, When the rational part of my brain finally overrode the enchantment of exploration, it was already too late. The light had changed dramatically while I wasn't paying attention. The bright afternoon having shifted into the golden tones of late day. Shadows were lengthening, and the temperature had dropped even further. I checked my GPS device and felt the first flutter of real concern. According to the coordinates, I had descended much farther than I realized, and the return journey would take considerably longer than the descent, climbing being always slower and more strenuous than going down. I needed to move fast. I retraced my steps, following the same path I had taken down, or at least trying to. The problem was that in the fading light, with shadows pooling in every depression, and the canopy blocking even more of the remaining daylight, everything looked different. The valley that had seemed so enchanting during my descent now felt confusing and maze-like. I would climb toward what I thought was the passage back up to the ridge, only to find myself blocked by a wall of stone that I didn't remember passing. The rock formations that I had been certain I would recognize all looked the same under the declining light. Weathered gray granite covered with the same moss, the same lichens. I tried again, choosing a different route, scrambling up a steep incline that looked promising, only to reach a dead end where the rock face became too sheer to climb without proper equipment. Frustration mounted. I consulted my compass, tried to orient myself by the maps I carried. But the problem was fundamental. This valley simply didn't exist in any official record. There were no trails marked, no topographical details that matched what I was seeing. It was as if I had descended into a geographical anomaly, a place that modern surveying had somehow completely missed or deliberately ignored. The thought was absurd, of course, but standing there in the gathering darkness, it felt disturbingly plausible. How could an entire valley this size not appear on any map? Had I somehow gotten completely turned around and ended up somewhere else entirely? But my GPS coordinates confirmed I was where I thought I was, just the valley itself wasn't supposed to be here. The panic began to set in properly when I realized that the temperature was dropping rapidly, far faster than normal mountain cooling. I could see my breath now, small clouds of condensation forming with each exhalation. The sweat I had worked up during my frantic climbing was cooling on my skin, making me shiver. I stopped and forced myself to think clearly, despite the rising fear. Continuing to scramble around in the dark looking for a way out was dangerous and potentially fatal. I could injure myself, could fall, could get even more hopelessly lost. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to stop, find shelter, and wait for daylight. In the mountains, more people died from making poor decisions while panicked than from any natural danger. I had a casaco thermico in my backpack, emergency supplies, a lighter, a knife. I could survive one night if I was smart about it. The key was finding adequate shelter before darkness fell completely and the temperature dropped below freezing. Because it would drop below freezing, that was certain. At this elevation at this time of year, nighttime temperatures regularly fell well below 0 degrees Celsius. I needed protection from the wind, which was already beginning to pick up, and I needed to start a fire immediately. I forced my legs to move, no longer climbing but traversing laterally across the slope, looking for any kind of overhang or cave or dense thicket that could provide shelter. My eyes scanned desperately as the light continued to fade, knowing that within 30 minutes it would be too dark to see anything. The forest around me was becoming a landscape of shadows and suggestions, individual trees blending into an undifferentiated mass of darkness. I pushed through undergrowth, my jacket catching on branches, pine needles scratching my face. My boots slipped on hidden roots and loose stones. My hands, reaching out to steady myself, grabbed rough bark that scraped skin, felt the cold slickness of moss-covered rock. Every muscle in my body was tense with urgency and fear. Finally, just as the last light was leaking from the sky, turning everything a deep purple blue, I found something. It wasn't much, barely qualified as shelter really, but it would have to do. There was a small rocky outcrop, a shelf of granite that projected out from the hillside, creating a depression underneath where the wind wouldn't hit directly. The ground there was relatively dry, covered with a thick layer of old pine needles. It was perhaps 2 meters deep and 3 meters wide, just enough space for one person to huddle with a small fire. The ceiling of rock was low, barely 1.5 meters high, which meant I would have to crouch or sit, but that low ceiling would also help trap heat. It was far from ideal, but compared to spending the night completely exposed on the mountainside, it was a blessing. I immediately dropped my backpack and started gathering firewood, moving as fast as I could in the rapidly vanishing light. Every dry branch I could find, every piece of fallen wood, handfuls of bark stripped from dead trees, pine cones that would burn hot and fast to get the fire started. I was racing against the darkness now, stumbling over obstacles I couldn't see, my hands working by feel as much as sight. I gathered far more wood than I thought I would need, creating a pile near my shelter, because I knew that once darkness fell completely, finding more fuel would be nearly impossible. My hands were already cold, fingers stiff and clumsy as I worked. I could feel the night closing in, not just visually, but physically, the temperature plummeting so fast I could sense it minute by minute. I arranged the driest materials I'd found in a careful structure under the overhang, creating a small teepee of twigs and bark with crumpled dry leaves and pine needles at the center. My emergency lighter came out of my pocket, and I said a small prayer that it would work. Sometimes, at high altitude, lighters could be temperamental. I flicked it once. Nothing. Twice. A small flame appeared and immediately went out. My heart sank. Third time, and the flame caught and held. I carefully lowered it to the tinder, watching with desperate hope as the flame licked at the dry leaves. For a terrible moment nothing happened, and then smoke began to curl upward, followed by a tiny orange glow that spread, catching first one pine needle, then another. I fed it carefully, adding progressively larger pieces of fuel, nursing that precious flame like it was the most important thing in the world, which, in that moment, it absolutely was. The fire grew, small flames becoming larger, spreading through my carefully constructed pile of fuel. Soon I had a real fire burning, flames dancing and crackling, sending blessed warmth radiating out into the small space under the overhang. The psychological relief was immediate and overwhelming. Fire meant safety, warmth, light, protection. It was the most fundamental survival tool humans had, and having it made the situation feel suddenly manageable. I fed the fire more wood, building it up until it was burning strongly, the flames reaching up toward the rock ceiling, creating a pocket of heat and light in the wilderness darkness. Only then did I allow myself to sit, my legs shaking with fatigue and delayed shock. I pulled out my water bottle and drank deeply, realizing I was dehydrated from the exertion and stress. Then I ate 2 energy bars mechanically, forcing the food down even though I wasn't hungry, knowing I needed the calories for warmth. Around me, the forest had plunged into complete darkness. There was no moon visible through the dense canopy, just an absolute blackness that pressed against the circle of firelight like something solid. The transition from day to night in the deep forest is startling in its completeness. One moment, there's enough light to see shapes and shadows. The next moment, there's nothing. An absence of light so total that your eyes keep trying to adjust but never succeed. The only illumination came from my fire and far above. An occasional glimpse of stars through gaps in the trees, cold and distant and indifferent. The sounds of the night forest began, a completely different acoustic environment from the daytime. The birds fell silent, replaced by insects, crickets chirping in rhythmic waves, the occasional hoot of an owl, closer than I would have preferred. There were rustlings in the undergrowth, small animals moving about their nocturnal business. Branches creaked in the wind. Things fell from trees, pine cones and dead limbs, hitting the ground with soft thuds. Every sound made me jump, my nerves stretched thin. But I told myself I was safe. I had fire, I had shelter, I had made it through the initial crisis. All I had to do was keep the fire going and wait for morning. At first light, I would be able to see clearly, to find my way back to the ridge. This was just one uncomfortable night, nothing more. People survived worse all the time. The cold intensified with shocking speed as the night deepened. Even with the fire burning steadily just a meter away, even with every layer of clothing I possessed wrapped around my body, the cold penetrated through everything. This wasn't the cold of a winter day in the city, where you could go inside and warm up. This was mountain cold, high-altitude cold, the kind that seems to have teeth and claws, that actively hunts for any gap in your defenses. I had put on every piece of clothing in my pack: base layer, insulating layer, my thermal jacket, waterproof outer shell, 2 pairs of socks, gloves, a wool hat pulled down over my ears. I wrapped myself in the emergency thermal blanket I always carried, that thin sheet of reflective material designed to conserve body heat. But nothing seemed adequate. The cold found ways through every barrier, creeping up from the ground despite the insulating layer of pine needles, seeping in through any small opening in my clothing, radiating down from the rock of oak. My body started shivering, small tremors at first that quickly became more violent. Shivering is the body's defense mechanism against cold. Muscles contracting rapidly to generate heat, but it's also exhausting. Each shiver burned energy, calories I couldn't easily replace, and the shivering itself made it hard to stay still, hard to conserve warmth. I huddled as close to the fire as I dared, close enough that my face felt hot from the flames while my back remained freezing. I kept rotating, trying to warm all sides of my body equally, but it was a losing battle. The fire simply couldn't generate enough heat to overcome the cold of the night. I fed it constantly, adding wood whenever the flames started to die down, watching my carefully gathered fuel supply diminish with growing anxiety. I had gathered a lot of wood, but not enough for an entire night. At the rate I was burning through it, I would run out in a few hours. What would I do then? I couldn't venture into the darkness to find more, couldn't see anything beyond the small circle of firelight. The thought of the fire dying, of being left alone in the absolute darkness with no warmth, sent a spike of pure terror through me. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. I couldn't sleep, didn't dare try, even though exhaustion was pulling at me like an undertow. Sleeping in this cold, without proper shelter, would be dangerous, possibly fatal. I had to stay awake, stay alert, keep the fire going. But staying awake was becoming harder with every passing minute. The combination of exhaustion from the day's hiking and climbing, the stress and fear, the physical drain of constant shivering, and the hypnotic effect of staring at flames in darkness all conspired to make me desperately sleepy. My eyelids grew heavy, felt like they had weights attached. My head kept nodding forward, chin dropping to my chest. Each time I would jerk awake, force my eyes open, add more wood to the fire. But the intervals between these wakings grew shorter, the pull of sleep stronger, and with the sleepiness came something else, something that should have alarmed me but, in my foggy state, felt almost pleasant. I started to feel warm. Not comfortably warm, but a spreading sensation of heat that seemed to radiate from inside my body. My fingers and toes, which had been painfully cold, now felt fine. Better than fine, they felt normal. The violent shivering began to subside. I felt myself relaxing, tension draining away. A part of my mind, a distant analytical voice, tried to tell me this was wrong, that feeling warm in freezing temperatures was a very bad sign. But that voice was easy to ignore. I was tired, so incredibly tired, and if I was warm now, surely it was safe to close my eyes, just for a minute, just a brief rest to gather strength. The fire was burning well. I could hear it crackling. Everything would be fine. My eyes began to close, consciousness starting to fade into that comfortable darkness that promised rest and peace and an end to the struggle. I was sliding into sleep, barely aware of it happening, when a sound ripped through the night. A branch breaking, close, very close. The sound penetrated through my drowsiness, enough to make my eyes open slightly, confusion clouding my thoughts. What was that? Should I care? It seemed so far away, so unimportant. Let me sleep. But then there was another sound. Footsteps, something large moving through the forest. Leaves crunching, undergrowth rustling. Something was approaching my camp. My survival instincts, operating on a level below conscious thought, triggered an adrenaline dump that shocked my system into alertness. My eyes snapped open, heart suddenly pounding, every sense straining to identify the threat. I grabbed a branch from my woodpile and thrust it into the fire, creating a torch that I held up to extend the circle of light. The flames illuminated dancing shadows between the trees, but no clear shapes. The footsteps stopped. Silence, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and my own harsh breathing. I waited, frozen in place, the torch trembling in my shaking hand. Seconds stretched impossibly long. Then I saw them. Eyes. 2 points of light reflecting the firelight, golden amber eyes floating in the darkness, approximately 15 meters away. The eyes were at the wrong height for a deer, too high off the ground, and there was something about their placement and shine that triggered every predator-prey instinct coded into human DNA. These weren't herbivore eyes. These belonged to something that hunted. My blood turned to ice in my veins. For several heartbeats I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My mind simply refused to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. I was alone on a mountain in the middle of the night, being watched by something with glowing eyes. Then the creature took a step forward, entering the outer edge of my firelight. And my brain finally supplied an identification. Wolf. It was a wolf, not a coyote, which would have been smaller and less threatening. Not a dog. Domestic dogs don't move like that. don't have that wild precision. This was a true wolf, Canis lupus, an apex predator that wasn't supposed to be in this region according to everything I had read. They had been extirpated from these mountains decades ago, or so the official records claimed, but clearly, impossibly, here one was. It was massive, far larger than I had imagined wolves could be. Its shoulder height was sizily 70 centimeters, maybe more, with a thick, powerful body that probably weighed 60 or 70 kilograms. The wolf's coat was a mixture of gray and brown with lighter patches, dense and healthy-looking, designed for surviving in exactly these kinds of harsh conditions. Its ears were erect and forward-facing, focused entirely on me. Its posture was alert, but not overtly aggressive, weight-balanced, ready to move in any direction. We stared at each other across the firelit space, predator and prey locked in a moment that felt like it lasted forever. My training, what little survival training I had received over the years, came back in fragments. Don't run. Running triggers chase instinct. Don't make direct sustained eye contact, that's a challenge. Make yourself appear larger, make noise. But my throat was completely dry, my voice locked somewhere deep in my chest. I couldn't have made a sound if my life depended on it, which it very possibly did. Should I throw the torch at it? Would that scare it away or provoke an attack? Should I reach for my knife? The knife seemed laughably inadequate against a creature built to kill elk and moose. My hands were shaking so badly I probably couldn't hold it properly anyway. So I just stood there, or rather crouched there under my rocky overhang, holding my improvised torch, trying not to show the absolute terror coursing through every cell of my body. The wolf continued to watch me with those unsettling golden eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. There was an intelligence in that gaze, an assessment happening. The wolf was trying to figure me out just as I was trying to figure it out. Was I prey? Was I threat? Was I competition? What was this odd creature crouching by a fire, making strange sounds with its breathing? After what felt like an hour, but was probably less than a minute, the wolf began to move again. But instead of approaching directly, it moved laterally, parallel to my position. It was circling. The wolf was circling my camp, and that felt even more ominous than a direct approach would have been. This was predatory behavior, the kind of movement wolves use when assessing prey from multiple angles, looking for weakness, planning an attack strategy. I tried to rotate to keep facing it, but the confined space under the overhand made movement difficult. I banged my head on the low rock ceiling, stars exploding in my vision, pain lancing through my skull. When my vision cleared, the wolf had moved to a different position, now to my left, rather than straight ahead. It had completed, perhaps, a quarter of its circle, and it was closer. Not much, maybe 2 meters closer, but definitely closer. Testing boundaries. Seeing how I would react. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, could hear it pounding in my ears. Every muscle was locked rigid with tension. This was the most dangerous situation I had ever been in, no question, no contest. I was trapped under a rock with a fire that was starting to die down, confronted by one of nature's most efficient predators. If the wolf decided to attack, I had almost no defense. It was faster, stronger, armed with weapons I couldn't match. My only advantages were the fire and human intelligence, and I wasn't sure either would be enough. The wolf completed its circuit, moving in complete silence, despite its size. Its paws touched the ground with a precision that was almost supernatural, never snapping a twig, never disturbing loose stones. It was like watching a shadow move, something not quite solid. The wolf ended up back approximately where it had started, 15 meters directly in front of my shelter, and there it stopped. We stared at each other again. I tried to read its body language. I tried to understand what it was thinking, what it was planning. Its tail was neutral, not raised in dominance or tucked in fear. Its ears remained forward, but were relaxed, not pinned back aggressively. Its mouth was closed, no teeth showing. None of this looked like pre-attack posturing, based on what little I knew about wolf behavior. But that didn't mean I was safe. Wild animals were unpredictable, could change their behavior in an instant. Maybe it was waiting for me to let my guard down. Maybe it was working up courage. Maybe it had cubs nearby and was warning me away from them. Or maybe the thought occurred to me with a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Maybe it was just curious. Wolves were intelligent, social animals. Maybe this one had never seen a human before, had no learnt fear or aggression, and was simply trying to figure out what I was. That thought was somehow both comforting and terrifying in equal measure. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the wolf turned and trotted away, melting back into the darkness. I heard its footsteps receding, growing fainter, until they disappeared entirely into the ambient sounds of the night. I stood there, or rather remained crouched there, for several more minutes, unable to move, unable to fully process what had just happened. My torch had burned down to almost nothing, the branch nearly consumed. I tossed it into the fire, and added several larger pieces of wood, building the flames back up. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now, adrenaline and cold combining to make fine motor control nearly impossible. I sank down into a sitting position, my back against the cold rock wall, and tried to calm my racing heart. That had been real. That had actually happened. A wolf, a real wolf, had circled my camp, had watched me with those burning eyes, had assessed me, and then left. Why had it left? Was it coming back? Should I be relieved or more worried? The questions spun through my mind without answers. The encounter had shocked me fully awake, chasing away the dangerous drowsiness that had been creeping over me. My body was flooded with stress hormones, every sense heightened, hyper-alert to every sound and movement in the darkness beyond my fire. The warmth I had been feeling earlier was completely gone, replaced by shivering so violent my teeth chattered uncontrollably. I was suddenly very aware of how cold I was, how dangerous my situation remained. The wolf was a new threat, yes, but the cold was still the primary danger. Hypothermia kills more people in the wilderness than animal attacks ever do. I needed to focus on staying warm, on keeping the fire going, on surviving until dawn. But now, there was this new element of fear layered over everything else. I kept checking the darkness, kept seeing eyes that weren't there, kept hearing footsteps in every rustle of leaves. Time continued its crawl, minutes feeling like hours. I had no idea what time it was. Couldn't see my watch in the flickering firelight without taking off my gloves, which I wasn't willing to do. It felt like I had been here forever, like the night would never end. How many hours until dawn? 4, 6, 8. I couldn't remember what time sunset had been, couldn't calculate how long I had been sitting here. Time had become meaningless, just an endless stretch of cold and dark and fear. My wood supply was getting dangerously low. I had perhaps enough fuel left for 2 more hours if I was very conservative. After that, the fire would die, and I would be alone in absolute darkness, with freezing temperatures and apparently wolves in the area. The thought was so terrifying that I forced it away, Refuse to think about it. Deal with now. Now you have fire. Keep it burning as long as possible and hope dawn comes before the wood runs out. One moment at a time. That's all I could handle. The drowsiness returned, more insidious this time because I was expecting it. Adrenaline could only keep you alert for so long before the crash came, and when it came, it hit hard. My eyelids began to droop again, despite my best efforts. My head nodded forward, chin dropping to chest. The fire became a blur of orange and yellow, hypnotic in its movement. I felt myself sliding away, consciousness dimming like a light on a dimmer switch being turned down slowly. The cold seemed less intense again, or maybe I was just getting used to it, my body adapting. No, that wasn't right. That wasn't adaptation. That was something else, something dangerous. I couldn't quite remember what, but it was important. I should stay awake. Why should I stay awake? It was so much effort. Wouldn't it be easier to just rest, just for a little while? Just close my eyes and rest and everything would be better. The fire would keep going, would keep me warm. I could hear it crackling, such a comforting sound. Like being at home in front of a fireplace, safe and comfortable. I started to drift, reality becoming distant and dreamlike. I was no longer in a cold mountain forest, but somewhere warm and soft. Maybe I was already home. Yes, that made sense. This had all been a dream. The getting lost, the cold, the wolf. I was home in my bed, and any moment I would wake up properly. So it was safe to sleep now, safe to let go. My eyes closed fully, my body beginning to slump to the side, and that's when I heard the growl. Low, guttural, unmistakable. A sound that activated every prey animal instinct in my hind brain. A sound that meant danger, threat, death. My eyes flew open and there it was again. The wolf. Much closer this time. So close, I could see details I had missed before. I could see the individual guard hairs in its coat standing slightly erect. I could see the muscles bunched in its shoulders. I could see its teeth, white and sharp, revealed by lips pulled back in a clear warning display. The growl continued, a deep rumbling that I could feel in my chest as much as hear. This was not curiosity. This was a threat. The wolf took a step toward me, and I heard a sound come out of my own throat, something between a gasp and a whimper, pure animal fear. My hand scrabbled for something, anything, to use as a weapon, closing on a thick branch from my dwindling woodpile. I held it up, not as a club, but as a barrier, something between me and those teeth. But the wolf didn't attack. It held its position, lips still curled back, growl still rumbling, and then slowly, deliberately, it stopped. The growl faded. Its lips covered its teeth. It stood there watching me, and I realized I was sitting bolt upright now, pressed back against the rock. Fully awake, fully alert, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my ribcage. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then the wolf turned and walked away, not hurrying, not running, just walking with that same fluid grace, and disappeared into the darkness again. I sat there gasping for air, shaking, my mind spinning. What had just happened? The wolf had threatened me, clearly, but it hadn't attacked. It had come close enough to attack easily, if that was its intention. I was vulnerable, trapped in a small space with limited mobility. But instead of attacking, it had just threatened and left. Why? What did it want? Was it trying to drive me away? But I couldn't leave, couldn't see in the dark, would get even more lost. Was it planning to return with pack members? Did wolves even hunt in packs in this situation? I realized I knew almost nothing about actual wolf behavior beyond basic facts, and those basic facts were useless right now. I needed to understand what was happening, and I simply didn't have the knowledge. What I did know, with absolute certainty, was that I was now completely awake. Whatever drowsiness had been pulling at me was gone, blasted away by that second encounter. The wolf had scared me awake. Whether that was its intention or a side effect, I couldn't say, but the result was clear. I was alert, aware, my mind functioning clearly for the first time in what felt like hours. I looked at the fire and saw it was burning low again, dangerously low. I had been so close to falling asleep that I'd stopped maintaining it. I quickly added more wood, precious wood from my shrinking supply, and got the flames built back up. The light pushed back the darkness a bit, created a larger bubble of relative safety. I checked my body, taking inventory. My fingers were numb, white at the tips, the flesh hard and waxy. Frostbite, early stages. My toes I couldn't feel at all, which was a very bad sign. My face felt stiff, my nose and cheeks probably also showing signs of frostbite. My core temperature was definitely lower than it should be. All of this was information my brain processed clinically, as if it was happening to someone else. I was in serious trouble. Even if I survived this night, even if I made it to dawn, I was going to have significant cold injuries. Frostbite could mean lost fingers or toes, could mean permanent nerve damage, could mean complications that lasted for years. But those were tomorrow's problems. Right now, the problem was surviving the next hour, then the next, then the next. That's all I could focus on. Immediate survival, moment by moment. The night stretched on, every minute an individual trial. I forced myself to move, to shift position, to wiggle my fingers and toes, despite the pain, trying to maintain some circulation. I knew I should stand up, should move around more, generate body heat through activity. But I was terrified to leave the small protection of my rocky shelter, terrified to step out into the darkness where the wolf might be waiting. So I stayed, crouched under the overhang, as close to the fire as I could get without burning myself, and I waited. The cold was now a living thing, a presence that surrounded me, that pressed in from all directions. It was no longer just cold temperature, it was an entity, malevolent and patient, waiting for any weakness to exploit. My shivering had become so violent, it was painful. Muscles contracting with such force that I worried about cramping, about injuring myself. I tried to breathe deeply, tried to use breathing techniques to stay calm, but every breath of frigid air burned my lungs, made my chest ache. And through it all, the drowsiness kept trying to return. It would creep in, despite the fear, despite the cold, despite everything. My eyelids would start to feel heavy again. My thoughts would become fuzzy. The fire would blur. And I would catch myself, would force my eyes wide, would recite facts or numbers or anything to keep my mind engaged. The capital of France is Paris. 2 + 2 = 4. My name is ... What was my name? Why couldn't I remember my name? That moment of confusion, of not remembering something so fundamental, sent a bolt of terror through me sharp enough to wake me fully again. That was bad. That was my brain not functioning properly. Hypothermia affects cognition, causes confusion, disorientation, impaired judgment. I knew this. I had read about it. But knowing about it and experiencing it were completely different things. How could I trust my own thoughts when my brain wasn't working right? How could I make good decisions? The answer was, I probably couldn't. All I could do was follow the most basic survival rules. Stay awake, keep the fire going, wait for dawn. Simple instructions that were becoming impossibly difficult to follow. Another hour crawled by, maybe 2. I had completely lost track of time. My wood supply was almost gone, just a few pieces left. I nursed the fire as carefully as I could, adding fuel a few twigs at a time, trying to make it last. But I knew the end was coming. Soon there would be no more wood. The fire would die. And then what? I couldn't think about it. Couldn't process that future. So I focused on now, on this moment, on keeping the current flames alive for 1 more minute. That's when I heard the footsteps again. The wolf was back. I didn't even feel fear this time, just a kind of resigned exhaustion. Of course it was back. Why wouldn't it be? Nothing else about this night made sense. Why should the wolf leave me alone? I watched as it entered the firelight, closer than ever before, maybe only 5 meters away. This close, I could see details I had missed in previous encounters. There were scars on its muzzle, old wounds healed over, evidence of a hard life in the wilderness. Its paws were huge, designed for traveling over snow, for pursuing prey across miles of rough terrain. Its coat was matted in places, burls caught in the fur, mud caked on its legs. This was not some fantasy wolf, some noble creature from a nature documentary. This was a real, working predator that killed to survive, that fought for territory and mates, that lived on the edge of starvation through harsh winters. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. The wolf sat down, just sat like a dog might sit, its tail curled around its body, and looked at me. There was no growling this time, no threat display. It just sat and watched. I stared back, too tired to be afraid anymore, too cold to care. We regarded each other across the firelight, 2 animals sharing the night for reasons neither of us probably understood. Then, as I watched, my eyes started to close again. I couldn't help it. The exhaustion was too overwhelming, the pull of sleep too strong. My eyelids drooped, head starting to nod forward. And immediately the wolf was on its feet, a sharp bark erupting from its throat. Not a howl, not a growl, but a bark, loud and startling. My eyes flew open, and the wolf was standing rigid, staring directly at me. The message was unmistakable. Stay awake, don't sleep. The wolf held my gaze for several long seconds, making sure I was fully alert, then slowly sat back down. What was happening? Why was this wolf trying to keep me awake? None of this made any sense. Wolves didn't care about humans. They avoided us, feared us, sometimes attacked us, but they didn't guard us. They didn't care whether we slept or stayed awake. Unless... unless what? My mind, sluggish and confused, couldn't complete the thought. All I knew was that every time I started to fall asleep, the wolf appeared and woke me up. It had happened 3 times now. That wasn't coincidence. That was pattern. The wolf was deliberately keeping me awake, but why? The night wore on, and the pattern continued. I would feel myself starting to drift, consciousness beginning to fade, and the wolf would intervene. Sometimes with a growl, sometimes with a bark, sometimes just by moving closer until my survival instincts shocked me awake. It was like being guarded by a creature that should have been my enemy. The wolf had appointed itself as my keeper, my warden, refusing to let me slide into the sleep that I craved with every fiber of my being. And I hated it for that. In my cold, dulled mind, the wolf became the enemy, the thing preventing me from the rest I so desperately needed. Why wouldn't it leave me alone? What did it want from me? If it was going to kill me, why didn't it just do it and get it over with. The thoughts were irrational. I knew that even as I thought them, but I couldn't control them. My brain was not working right, thoughts fragmenting and reforming in strange patterns. Time becoming elastic, reality taking on a dreamlike quality. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the wolf was real, or if I was hallucinating. Maybe I had been hallucinating this entire time. Maybe there was no wolf, just my mind creating threats to keep myself alert. But no, the wolf was real. Too solid to be imagination, too detailed to be hallucination. I could smell it sometimes when the wind shifted, a wild smell of fur and earth and something else, something distinctly animal. My fire was down to coals now, the last of my wood long since burned. The red glow of embers provided almost no light, just enough to see vague shapes. The cold intensified further without the flames, became truly unbearable. I was beyond shivering now, my body seeming to give up on that defense, going still in a way that some dim part of my brain recognized as extremely dangerous. My thoughts were becoming more disordered, jumping from topic to topic without connection. I thought about my apartment in the city, wondered if I had locked the door when I left. Thought about a girl I had dated in college, couldn't remember her name. Thought about a documentary I had watched about wolves, something about them being reintroduced to Yellowstone. The thoughts came and went like clouds, without meaning or purpose, and always the wolf was there. Sometimes I could see it, a shadow at the edge of the darkness. Sometimes I could only hear it, moving through the forest around my camp, circling endlessly. And every time my eyes closed for more than a second, it was there, bringing me back, refusing to let me go. I wanted to curse it, to throw stones at it, to make it leave, but I didn't have the energy. All I could do was sit and endure, trapped between the cold and the darkness and the wolf, waiting for a dawn that might never come. But dawn did come, eventually. It came so slowly I almost didn't notice it at first. The absolute blackness of night began to thin, became very dark grey rather than pure black. Then the grey lightened by imperceptible degrees, revealing shapes that had been hidden. The trees emerged from the darkness, like ghosts materializing, their trunks and branches becoming defined. The sky above, what I could see of it through the canopy, shifted from black to navy, blue to pale grey. And then, finally, incredibly, the first rays of actual sunlight broke through. Horizontal beams of golden light that pierced the forest and touched the ground in bright pools. I had never seen anything more beautiful in my entire life. Sunlight meant warmth, meant visibility, meant survival. I had made it through the night. I was still alive. The realization brought tears that froze on my cheeks. I started to laugh, a sound that came out more like a sob. I had survived. Against all odds, through the worst night of my life, I had survived. As the light grew stronger, I looked around for the wolf, expecting to see it one more time. And there it was, standing on a small rise, perhaps 20 meters away, fully visible in the morning light. It was even more impressive in daylight, coat gleaming silver and brown in the sun, muscles defined under the thick fur. A magnificent animal in its prime. It stood watching me, just as it had watched me all night, those golden eyes holding my gaze. And in that moment, as my mind began to clear slightly with the arrival of dawn and warming temperatures, as rational thoughts started to return, I understood. The wolf hadn't been threatening me, it had been protecting me from myself. The drowsiness, the feeling of warmth, the desperate desire to sleep, these were all symptoms of severe hypothermia. Hypothermia kills, by making victims feel comfortable, by convincing them that sleep is safe when sleep is actually death. The body shuts down gradually, peacefully, consciousness fading without pain. People freeze to death with smiles on their faces, thinking they're warm and safe. If I had fallen asleep, I would never have woken up. My body temperature would have continued dropping, vital organs would have failed, and I would have died quietly in that rocky shelter. But the wolf hadn't let me sleep. Every time I started to drift off, it had woken me up, kept me alert, kept me moving, kept me conscious. The fear it induced, the adrenaline from each encounter, these had kept my heart rate up, kept my body fighting, kept me alive through the critical hours. The wolf had understood what I couldn't understand in my impaired state. It had seen that I was in danger and had made the choice to help, to guard, to keep vigil through the long night. Why? I would never know. Maybe the wolf had lost cubs and some instinct had transferred. Maybe wolves understood cold and survival better than I gave them credit for. Maybe it was just curious, and my repeated attempts to sleep irritated it. Or maybe, just maybe, there was a kind of intelligence and compassion in the natural world that we don't understand, can't measure, can't explain with science. Maybe sometimes animals help us for reasons that have nothing to do with survival or pack dynamics or learned behavior. Maybe they help us because they can, because something in them recognizes suffering in another creature and chooses to act. The wolf and I looked at each other across that sunlit forest clearing for a long moment. I wanted to say something, to thank it, to acknowledge what it had done, but I had no words, and the wolf wouldn't have understood human speech anyway. So I just nodded, a small gesture of respect and gratitude. The wolf's ears twitched. Its tail moved slightly, and then it turned and trotted away. I watched it go, moving through the trees with that silent grace, until it disappeared into the forest. It didn't look back. Its job was done, and it was returning to its own life, its own pack, its own concerns. I sat there for a long time after it left, letting the sun warm my face, feeling life slowly returning to my frozen limbs. The pain was extraordinary as sensation returned, like thousands of needles stabbing into my fingers and toes. But pain meant nerves still worked, meant that damage might not be permanent. I flexed my fingers carefully, wiggled my toes in my boots, assessed the damage. Frostbite for certain, probably 2nd degree on my fingers and toes, 1st degree on my face. I would need medical attention, would have significant healing time ahead. But I was alive. That was what mattered. When I finally felt capable of moving, I stood up slowly, every muscle protesting, my body stiff and sore from hours of sitting in the cold. I gathered my gear with clumsy hands, packed everything away, and began the process of finding my way back to the main trail. In daylight, with clear vision and a functioning brain, the path was obvious. I recognized the landmarks I had missed the night before, found the passage back up to the ridge. It took hours, my progress slow and painful, but I made it. By early afternoon I was back on the marked trail, heading towards civilization. Other hikers passed me, their faces showing concern at my appearance. I must have looked terrible, frostbitten, exhausted, clothes dirty and torn. Several offered help, shared water and food, suggested calling for rescue. I accepted the food and water gratefully, but declined rescue. I could walk. It would take time, but I could make it on my own. I needed to make it on my own. That night, the real night, I reached a ranger station. A ranger took one look at me and called for medical assistance. I spent the next week in a hospital being treated for moderate hypothermia, frostbite, dehydration, and exhaustion. The doctors said I was incredibly lucky. Another hour in those conditions and the outcome would have been very different. They asked what had kept me awake through the critical period, what had prevented me from falling into the fatal sleep. I tried to explain about the wolf, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. "Wolves don't behave that way," they said. I must have been confused, disoriented from the hypothermia. Maybe it was a dog, or maybe I imagined it. The mind plays tricks in extreme conditions. I didn't argue. I knew what I had experienced, and whether they believed me didn't matter. The months of recovery that followed were difficult. The frostbite on my fingers and toes healed slowly, leaving permanent sensitivity to cold and occasional numbness. I lost 2 toenails that eventually grew back, and the tips of 3 fingers remained stiff, the joints not bending quite as they should. These were small prices to pay for my life, I knew, but they served as constant reminders of that night. Every time the weather turned cold, every time I felt that particular bite in the air, I was transported back to that rocky shelter, feeling the cold seeping through my clothes, watching the wolf watch me. I read everything I could find about wolf behavior, consulted with wildlife biologists, searched for similar accounts of wolves helping humans. There were stories scattered through history and various cultures, of wolves behaving in ways that didn't fit expected patterns. Stories of wolves guiding lost travelers, of wolves warning of danger, of wolves forming inexplicable bonds with humans. Most scientists dismiss these as folklore, anthropomorphization, misunderstanding of normal wolf behavior. But some researchers, the ones who had spent decades in the field observing wolves in the wild, were more open to possibilities. They spoke of wolf intelligence, of problem-solving abilities, of social complexity that we were only beginning to understand. Could a wolf recognize hypothermia in another species? Could it understand the danger and choose to intervene? The answer was, we don't know. We simply don't understand enough about wolf cognition and behavior to say definitively what they can and cannot do. I eventually returned to those mountains, driven by a need I couldn't fully articulate. I found the spot where I had spent that terrible night, the rocky overhang still there, the fire ring still visible as a circle of blackened earth. I stood there remembering every detail, feeling the echo of that night's terror and wonder. I left a cairn of stones nearby, stacked carefully, a marker that meant something to me even if no one else would ever understand it. It was a thank you, a memorial, an acknowledgement of an inexplicable gift. I returned to those mountains many times in the following years, hiking the same trails, exploring new areas, always alert for a glimpse of silver-gray fur, always hoping to see those golden eyes one more time. But I never did. The wolf, if it was still alive, if it still roamed those mountains, remained hidden. Maybe it had been a one-time encounter, a unique convergence of circumstances that would never repeat. Or maybe the wolf did this regularly, patrolling its territory, watching over vulnerable creatures, a guardian that no one knew about because the ones it helped couldn't understand what was happening until afterward. I like to think it's still out there, that wolf, still roaming the mountains, following its own paths, living its wild life. And maybe, just maybe, still watching over lost travelers who find themselves in trouble, ensuring they make it through their darkest nights, refusing to let them surrender to the cold, keeping them awake, keeping them alert, keeping them alive, not because it expects anything in return, not because humans deserve saving, but simply because it can. Because in that moment, it was the only thing standing between a dying creature and oblivion, and it chose to act. That night changed me in ways I'm still discovering. It taught me humility, showing me how quickly experience and preparation can become worthless in the face of simple mistakes and bad luck. It taught me about the thin line between life and death, how close we always are to that edge without realizing it. It taught me that the things we fear most might sometimes be the things that save us, that threat and protection can wear the same face. And most importantly, it taught me that the world is stranger, more mysterious, and more compassionate than our scientific models acknowledge. That mercy exists in unexpected places, in unexpected forms. That help can come from sources we never thought to ask, from creatures we've painted as villains in our stories. The wolf could have walked away, could have ignored me entirely, stayed hidden in the forest, let nature take its course. But it didn't, for reasons I will never fully understand. It chose to spend an entire freezing night keeping vigil over a lost, dying human. It gave up time and energy and safety to ensure a member of another species survived. That single act, more than any philosophical text or religious teaching, showed me what it means to have compassion. To see suffering and respond, even when it's difficult, even when there's no benefit, even when the suffering creature is not one of your own. I tell this story sometimes, when the circumstances feel right. Around campfires mostly, when the night is deep and the flames are dancing, and people are open to stories that defy easy explanation. The reactions vary. Some listeners are skeptical, dismissing it as exaggeration or misinterpretation. Some are fascinated, seeing spiritual meaning or mystical significance. Some are thoughtful, recognizing the deeper questions the story raises about animal intelligence and consciousness. And some, a few, hear it and share their own stories of inexplicable encounters with animals. Moments where the natural world reached out and touched them in ways that can't be explained by instinct or coincidence. These are my favorite conversations because they remind me I'm not alone in my experience. The world is full of mysteries, full of moments where the boundary between species dissolves, where understanding passes without language, where compassion flows between creatures that should be enemies or strangers. We don't talk about these moments much because they don't fit our scientific worldview, don't match our assumptions about the natural world, but they happen more often than we acknowledge, and each time they do, they remind us that we share this planet with beings far more complex and aware than we give them credit for. That wolf, whatever its motivations, whatever sparked its decision to help me that night, gave me a gift beyond survival. It gave me a different way of seeing the world. Before that night, I viewed nature as beautiful, but ultimately indifferent, governed by ruthless laws of survival and competition. Animals did what instinct programmed them to do, nothing more. But that wolf showed me otherwise. It acted outside expected parameters, made choices that couldn't be explained by simple biology. It demonstrated that the wild world has depths we haven't plumbed, capacities we haven't measured, and wisdom we haven't learned to recognize. In our arrogance, we think we understand the natural world. We categorize species, map their behaviors, reduce them to genetic code and evolutionary imperatives. But then something like this happens, an encounter that shatters the categories, that reveals how little we actually know. We're like children playing in the shallows, thinking we understand the ocean because we felt the waves on our feet, never realizing the profound depths stretching beyond our sight. The wolf was a messenger from those depths, a reminder of how much we have yet to learn. My fingers are typing. These words still bear the marks of that night. The scars from frostbite, visible if you look closely. They ache when the weather turns cold, a physical reminder that never lets me forget, but I don't resent them. They're part of my story now, part of the lesson. Every time they ache, every time I feel that twinge of old damage, I remember the wolf. I remember those golden eyes watching me through the darkness. I remember the fear and the cold and the overwhelming desire to simply give up. And I remember that something chose not to let me give up, chose to keep me fighting when I had no fight left. That memory, that gift, is worth any amount of physical scarring. It's worth the chronic pain, the cold sensitivity, the permanent reminders, because it showed me that the universe, for all its indifference and cruelty, also contains moments of pure, inexplicable grace. Moments where the rules bend, where compassion flows from unexpected sources, where life persists against all odds because something, somewhere, decided it was worth preserving. I carry that knowledge with me every day now. When I face difficult situations, when I'm tempted to give up on something hard, when I feel alone and overwhelmed, I think of the wolf. If a wild predator could spend an entire night keeping vigil over a stranger, surely I can find the strength to persist through my own dark hours. If the wolf could choose compassion over indifference, surely I can extend that same compassion to others. If the wolf could see danger I couldn't see in myself and act to protect me from it, surely I can be more aware of the hidden dangers in my own life and the lives of those around me. The wolf became my teacher that night, instructing me in lessons I am still learning. About vigilance, about recognizing danger in its subtle forms, about the importance of staying alert and engage even when surrender seems easier, about the value of persistence, of refusing to quit no matter how difficult the situation becomes, about the unexpected places help can come from, and the importance of being open to assistance even from unlikely sources, and about the responsibility we all share to be guardians for each other, to keep watch over those who can't watch over themselves, to refuse to let others succumb to their own hypothermia, whatever form it takes. Some years after that night, I was hiking with a friend in a different mountain range when we encountered another hiker who was clearly in distress. He had gotten separated from his group, was underdressed for the dropping temperature, was showing early signs of hypothermia, confusion, slurred speech, lack of coordination. My friend wanted to call for rescue immediately, but I recognized that we didn't have time to wait. The man needed help now, needed someone to keep him alert and moving until rescue could arrive. So I stayed with him, keeping him talking, keeping him active, refusing to let him sit down and rest, even though he begged to. I was the wolf that night, the uncomfortable presence that wouldn't leave him alone, that forced him to keep going when his body and mind were telling him to stop. It wasn't pleasant. He was angry with me, called me names, pushed me away. But I persisted, just as the wolf had persisted with me. When rescue finally arrived 2 hours later, when the man was safely being loaded into a warming ambulance, my friend asked me how I had known what to do, how I had recognized the danger so quickly. I told him about the wolf, about the night I nearly died, and the creature that saved me by refusing to let me quit. He looked at me strangely, uncertain whether to believe the story. But the next day, when we visited the rescued hiker in the hospital, the man thanked me with tears in his eyes. The doctors had told him he was less than an hour from serious danger when we found him. My refusal to let him rest, my insistence that he keep moving and talking, had quite possibly saved his life. "You were like my guardian angel," he said. I smiled and thought, no, I was like a wolf. And that's what I am now, what that night made me. A person who understands that sometimes the greatest kindness is refusing to be kind in the conventional sense. That sometimes love means being uncomfortable, pushy, relentless. That sometimes saving someone requires forcing them to face things they'd rather avoid, to stay awake when they want to sleep, to keep moving when they want to stop. The wolf taught me that lesson better than any human teacher ever could, teaching through action rather than words, through a single long night of steadfast vigilance. So when people ask me about the scars on my hands, about why I flinch slightly when the temperature drops, about the distant look I sometimes get on winter nights, I tell them the story. About the night I got lost in the mountains, about the cold that nearly killed me, and about the wolf that wouldn't let me die. Some believe it, some don't, but that doesn't matter. The story is true, the lesson is real, and the wolf, wherever it is now, changed my life in ways that will last until my own final night comes. And when that final night does come, whenever that might be, I hope I meet it with the same dignity that Wolf showed, with clear eyes, with purpose, with the knowledge that I acted according to my nature, that I helped where I could, that I kept vigil over others who needed guarding. I hope I can face the darkness the way the wolf faced it, not with fear but with acceptance, knowing I did what I was meant to do. That's the final gift the wolf gave me, beyond survival, beyond the lessons about hypothermia and wilderness safety. It showed me how to live with intention, with awareness, with compassion that transcends the boundaries we draw between species and individuals. It showed me that we're all connected in ways we don't fully understand, that our actions ripple out in unexpected directions, that a single choice to help can echo through years and lives. The wolf made its choice that night on a cold mountain, in a dark forest, for reasons I'll never fully comprehend. It chose to help, to protect, to persist through difficulty for the sake of another creature's survival. And that choice, more than anything else I've experienced, showed me what it means to be truly alive. Not just breathing and eating and sleeping, but engaged with the world, responding to its needs, acting with purpose and compassion, even when it's hard, even when it's frightening, even when there's no clear benefit. That night in the mountains taught me that the most important acts are often the ones done in darkness, when no one is watching, when there's no reward or recognition. The wolf's vigil was invisible, would have remained completely unknown if I hadn't survived to tell about it. But the wolf kept vigil anyway, not for glory or gratitude, but simply because it was needed. That's the standard I try to live by now, the example I follow. To do what's right when no one is watching, to help when it's inconvenient, to persist when it would be easier to walk away, to be the wolf in someone else's dark night, standing guard until dawn comes. This is my story. This is my truth. This is what the wolf taught me during one terrible, transformative night in the mountains, and I will carry these lessons and these scars until my last day.